And so you lived with this for years and
did.
didn't tell anybody.
I lived with it. I was suicidal. I was severely depressed, insomnia, and I was just screaming on the inside. And I suffered in silence, which is what, unfortunately, most victims do. And I'm here to try to eliminate that as much as I can.
In 2009, It's All Local spoke with Jenna Quinn, a young lady whose story of sexual abuse by a close family friend led to legislation called Jenna's Law in the state of Texas. Now, 3 years later, the stories inundating the news let us know that Jenna is not alone. Though Jenna was very vocal about her story, there are thousands of stories that are untold. Child sexual abuse crosses all ages, genders, races, ethnicities, and economic backgrounds. According to the Centers for Disease Control, as many as 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 6 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse before the age of 18. Up next, Seth McCoy speaks with Needham Youth Services as well as Needham Child Assault Prevention Program to find ways to recognize and deal with child sexual assault.
Hello and welcome to It's All Local. I'm Seth McCoy. Joining me today are John Madelman and Katie Cothart from the Needham Youth Services and Jessica Hogue from the Child Assault Prevention Program. We're going to be talking about child sexual abuse. If you, somebody you know, or if you just want more information on the topic, you'll want to stay tuned to hear what we have to say. And joining me now are John Madelman, Katie Coulthard, and Jessica Hogue. Welcome to It's All Local.
Thank you.
We're here today to talk about something that is very serious. It's something that's been in the news a lot lately in terms of the Penn State scandal and also something recently with Syracuse University, and that is, of course, child sexual abuse by somebody that a child is entrusted to, whether it be, in the case of Penn State and Syracuse, a coach allegedly, or of course it could happen in a home where one parent or a step-parent or even a sibling could be sexually abusing another child in the home. So I want to talk with all of you about the things to look out for, what parents should be doing, what maybe siblings should be doing if they suspect that either their sibling or a friend is being molested. So Jessica, we'll start with you. I know you go into schools and you give training, so tell me a little bit about what it is that you prepare kids for.
Well, with the CAP program, what we talk to children about is ways that they can either prevent abuse by a known person or stop abuse if it's happening. And the major things that we talk to kids about are, being able to say no, and that they have the right to say no. It's very complicated for children when the person that is abusing them is someone who's trusted and someone who is in a caretaking role with them. And children are taught to be respectful and not sort of stand up for themselves in that way. So our message to children is that they have the right to say no when someone is doing something that makes them feel uncomfortable or afraid. Even if the person is close to them, someone that is in their family, anything like that. So that's the first thing, that they have the right to say no and stand up for themselves. And the next thing that we teach children, and it's very important, is to think about who the trusted people, the trusted adults in their lives are, people they would go to if they had a problem, if they were worried about something, and those are the people that they want to tell if something like this is happening to them.
What happens if that person is the person who's abusing them, though?
That's why it can be complicated, and that's why we talk to children about thinking about all the different adults in their lives. It could be a teacher, a guidance counselor, someone outside their family, a family friend that they can go to with a problem, and especially in situations with child sexual abuse when it might be someone inside their family, it might be important for them to tell someone outside their family. Because it might be hard for their family to believe that another family member could be doing this to them. So one of the major things that we talk about in that section of the workshop is that they need to tell. They need to keep telling until they find someone who believes them and is able to has the time to listen to them and is able to get them the help that they need.
And Katie, you work with the kids who have been assaulted. how difficult is it for them to actually tell? I mean, I would imagine that there are some cases where they might tell a parent, they might tell a teacher, they might tell a friend, and that's, I want to talk about that specifically too, is when, let's say, a teenager is telling another teen, this is happening to me, and then how does that get the ball rolling, and how do you encourage other teens that if a friend comes to them and says, hey, this is happening to me, to take that next step and tell an adult?
I think, as Jessica said, it's really difficult. I mean, I think it's difficult for adults to say something bad is happening to them, and I think kids specifically, it's really hard because the way I look at it is developmentally, they don't think that somebody that they care and love about will hurt them in any aspect, whether it's child abuse, teenage violence situation, domestic violence situation. So it can get complicated. I teach kids and work with a lot of kids to be the friends who look out for those scenarios, and always talk about if you have a friend, family member, somebody you love who's acting different, who's not acting themselves, to ask the question, is everything okay? Because sometimes if children don't feel comfortable telling, having somebody open that door for them to be able to talk about it is just as important, because I think it is a hard thing to discuss. Again, they don't want to believe somebody's hurting them in any way. So sometimes having that friend ask them, is everything okay? You seem a little different. Is something going on? It might actually, as I say, open the floodgates, which then in and of itself is really difficult, because then as the friend, what do they do? Right. And again, I always say to the kids I work with, young or teenagers, that's big and heavy for an adult. And I would want to go tell somebody or talk to a colleague or talk to a friend. So I encourage them to talk to either another friend. Hopefully they'll talk to an adult, whether it's at school or outside of school, because not everyone is comfortable, going to specific people, but to find someone that they trust to talk about it, to say, where do I go with this? But I always encourage kids not to keep it to themselves, because it's too heavy. It's too important of a topic.
A lot of times kids tend to internalize that they don't want to tell anybody, and in some cases, even if they are telling people, they're not believing them. They're not listening to the story. John, how do you encourage parents when they're hearing a child come to them, or another adult, a child is coming to them and saying, this is happening to me? How do you encourage the parent to believe that child?
Well, let's be honest. No parent wants to believe it. It's a terrible, terrible thing. So a lot of parents will respond either in their mind or verbally, that's not true, or not believe it. It's really important for parents just to listen, just to keep their mouth closed and just to listen, nodding, encouraging, and getting the information. I always say to parents, you don't have to make this determination. Get the information, talk to a mental health professional, talk to the police, and then see what they have to say. But I have to tell you, kids don't make these things up. When kids come to adults and they say things, you can be sure it's true. It's horrific, it's overwhelming, it's confusing. Their whole world is disoriented. And if you can think about a little child who has been violated in some way, that is traumatic. And they want to tell people. At the same time, they're scared, because often the perpetrator is saying, don't tell anyone, keep this secret. So they struggle internally. And my sense is when kids tell us, it is a major effort to do it, and it's after a lot of thought and trepidation. So we as parents really need to acknowledge it. Thank you for telling me that. It's a very simple, respectful thing. And remember, parents may not like what they're going to hear, because it's going to require some action. What do I do? How do I do it? And that is where contacting the CAP program, Needham Youth Services, the police, is really important. Parents don't have to know every step, but what they have to know is how to be respectful and how to listen.
And that's so important to actually listen. I went to school with actually two girls, both molested by their stepfathers, and one had the proper response, which was her mother took the proper action, got rid of him, he went to jail. The other one, her stepmother, or her mother, didn't believe. And it happened to her and her sister. The mother didn't believe, didn't do anything, and it took years for it to come out and finally to somebody take action. So, I mean, that's something.
And think about the trauma for someone. You imagine, you're telling someone the deepest, darkest secret of your life, something that's so painful and so personal, and they're saying it doesn't happen. Forget about what happens to the perpetrator. That person has to live with it, and the message is, why would I tell anyone else? No one's going to believe. And those people suffer really for a lifetime.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's what research shows, that children, when they disclose, if they are believed, if they are told that it's not their fault, which is really important, and if they know that the grown-ups around them are going to take some action, the outcome for that child is much better. For a child, they experience much less shame, much less guilt than for a child who, is telling or tries to tell and isn't believed, action isn't taken. And when a child tells and is believed, then also the perpetrator can be stopped. And that's really important, because we know that perpetrators often have more than one victim.
Right. And I want to get back to the Penn State case,
Yes.
because I think that is just, allegedly what has happened is unbelievable. And for something like this to go on for so long, how do we look at somebody who his public persona is one that was great, he was a coach, he was helping kids under the guise of helping kids, but how do you go through that mess and say, wait a minute, there might be something a little off here? Because you, of course, don't want to look at everybody who's trying to help kids and be like, oh, she's a little strange or he's a little strange. And
There were a lot of red
hunt.
flags,
Yeah.
both in that case and the Syracuse case. I mean, in the Syracuse case, we had an assistant coach who was going on trips overnight, having young boys stay in the hotel room. So what does that mean? It means we don't want to see it. We don't want to believe. He's a nice person. He's accomplished. He's been at Syracuse for over 30 years. And sometimes we have to step back and say, wow, does this make sense? And oftentimes people don't do it because it takes effort, it takes time, and you don't want to be standing alone. But if you go back to virtually all these cases, there are a lot of red flags. The other point is that predators spend a lot of time thinking about how they can put themselves into situations where they have proximity to young people. And we know from the Penn State case, the foundation that man founded, I know he hasn't been tried yet,
Right.
but we know that he put himself in a position. And yes, there are wonderful, loving adults, and most adults are loving, doing great things. But we also have to be aware there are predators out there, and they destroy lives.
Yeah, and I mean, as John said, it's very typical for a perpetrator to put himself in a position where he has access to children. I mean, a foundation for children who have special needs or are needy is really typical. Those children tend to have a higher victimization rate because they're more in need of attention.
And they probably may have been victimized beforehand, so it's sort of a...
Yeah, and children, they may be less likely to be believed in the perpetrator's eyes when they do tell. So, it's very, very complicated, the whole relationship between a perpetrator and a victim, and all those grooming behaviors that the perpetrator spends a lot of time doing to get to the point where they're able to abuse the child. It's a constant testing of the boundaries to see if the child is going to push back, to see if the family is going to push back. And what I would say, as grown-ups and as a community, we need to really pay attention to red flags and listen to your gut. If something doesn't feel right,
It probably isn't.
it probably isn't. Look at it, run it past somebody else. Am I crazy? Would I do this with a child? Is this normal behavior? And really pay attention to those kinds of signs.
And Jessica, you know the statistics. I mean, I don't know if you can tell us some statistics, but some of the statistics are really frightening.
Well, one in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually assaulted by the age of 18. We think it might be more like 1 in 4 for boys. Boys are less likely to disclose.
Well, and I was going to say that I think there's a difference between girls being able to go and talk, whereas boys, I would imagine, probably internalize it a lot more and maybe keep it quiet, especially if the perpetrator is another man.
Yes, yeah, and that is another added dimension to the secrecy around it for boys, is worrying that it makes them gay, the whole, all that kind of stuff and boys are less likely to be seen as victims in our society. So for